begins to feel. People warn you about retirement money. They warn you about cholesterol, blood pressure, medications, and doctor visits. But very few people sit down and tell you the truth about what really changes between 65 and 75. And I'll tell you something from my own life, friends. This is not the decade when life becomes impossible. It's the decade when life becomes heavier. Little things, ordinary things, things that never used to cost you a second thought suddenly ask something from you. A little more energy, a little more courage, a little more patience. And if you don't understand what's happening, you begin blaming yourself for changes that are actually happening to almost everybody your age. That's why now I want to talk with you about 6 challenges that hit many people in these years. Not to depress you, quite the opposite. I want you to understand them before they quietly steal pieces of your life without permission. Because once you understand what's happening, you can fight back gently. Not with force, not with denial, but with awareness. The first challenge is sameness. Now this one sneaks up on people. Most folks don't even realize it's happening. One day, you notice you've been driving the same roads for months, eating the same meals, watching the same television programs, sitting in the same chair every evening while the days blur together like somebody photocopied your life over and over again. I went through this myself after I turned 70. I had a diner I loved, same corner booth every Tuesday morning, same eggs, same coffee, same waitress calling me hun. At first it felt comforting, familiar, safe. But after a while I noticed something uncomfortable. My world was shrinking without asking my permission. My brain wasn't waking up anymore. I wasn't curious. I wasn't interested. Days stopped feeling memorable. And let me tell you something important, friends. The brain gets old faster when nothing surprises it anymore. People think staying sharp means crossword puzzles and vitamins. Those things are fine, but what really keeps the mind alive is novelty. Small surprises, tiny moments where your brain has to pay attention again. One afternoon, I drove 3 streets farther than usual and found a little park I'd never noticed before. Sat there watching 2 boys play basketball while an old woman fed birds from a paper bag. Nothing extraordinary happened. But when I got home that evening, I realized something. I remembered the day clearly. That's what novelty does. It wakes the mind up. So now I tell older people this everywhere I go. Once a week, do one unfamiliar thing. Nothing dramatic. You don't need to jump out of airplanes at 73 years old. Just walk a different street, read a different author, try a restaurant on the other side of town, sit on a different bench in the park. The aging brain doesn't need excitement nearly as much as it needs interruption. Because when every day looks identical, the mind slowly stops recording life. And that, my friends, is a dangerous way to grow old. The second challenge is the one nobody likes talking about because it feels embarrassing. It's the shrinking of your social world. Not all at once, slowly, quietly. At first, you stop making phone calls because you feel tired. Then you stop accepting invitations because staying home sounds easier. Then months pass and you realize the phone barely rings anymore. I've watched this happen to good men, strong men, men who spent 40 years working around people every single day, suddenly sitting alone in silence, wondering where everybody went. But here's the truth, nobody explains properly. Often the people didn't disappear first. The impulse disappeared first. The desire to reach outward gets softer as we age. That's why loneliness becomes so dangerous after 65. It isn't only about being alone, it's about slowly losing the instinct to reconnect. I remember after my wife passed, there were afternoons where I could hear laughter outside from neighbors on their porches, and I would think to myself, maybe I should walk over there. But then another voice would whisper, maybe tomorrow. That little sentence can steal years from a person. Maybe tomorrow. Then tomorrow becomes 6 months. Now listen carefully because this matters. At our age, you do not need dozens of friends. You do not need a busy social calendar. You simply need regular human contact. Tiny, repeated connections. The cashier who recognizes your face. The neighbor who waves while taking out the trash. The barber who asks how your week went. These small interactions are more important than pride allows us to admit. Human beings are social creatures until the very end. And I'll tell you another thing I learned the hard way. Solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Solitude can be beautiful. Some mornings I sit by the window with my coffee and the silence feels rich and peaceful. That's solitude. But loneliness feels empty, heavy, like the walls are slowly moving inward. Older people must learn the difference. One feeds the spirit, the other slowly starves it. So if you're listening and you realize you haven't spoken to another person in 2 or 3 days, don't ignore that. Don't wait for motivation to magically return. Action comes first now, not feeling. Sometimes at 72, you have to put your shoes on before the desire arrives. And strangely enough, once you get out there, the desire often follows behind you. Now, the third challenge may be the hardest one of all because it attacks your pride. It's learning how to receive help. Most of our generation was taught that strength meant handling things alone. We raised children, paid bills, worked jobs we hated, cared for sick parents, survived losses nobody even knows about. We became experts at carrying weight quietly. But somewhere after 70, life starts asking a painful question. Can you let someone help you without feeling ashamed? That's not easy. I remember slipping in my kitchen one winter morning. Didn't break anything, thankfully, but I sat there on the cold floor longer than I'd like to admit. And my first instinct wasn't to call somebody. My first instinct was to hide it. Isn't that strange? Even alone on the floor, many older people are still protecting everyone else from their own reality. We don't want to become burdens. We don't want our children worrying. We don't want neighbors seeing weakness. But friends, refusing help does not preserve dignity nearly as much as people think it does. Sometimes it only delays disaster. I knew a man named Walter, proud fellow, retired electrician, tough as nails. Wouldn't let anybody mow his lawn even after his breathing got bad. Wouldn't use a cane, wouldn't ask his daughter for rides to appointments. Kept saying, I'm fine. You know what happened? One bad fall. Hospital rehab. Lost almost all independence in 6 months because he waited too long to accept small support. That changed me deeply. I began realizing something important. Asking for help early is not surrender. It's strategy. Smart aging is not about proving you still can do everything alone. Smart aging is preserving energy for what matters most. And let me tell you something else many seniors need to hear. People who love you often want to help more than you allow them to. Sometimes when you refuse every offer, you are not protecting them. You are shutting them out of loving you. That took me years to understand. There's another challenge that sneaks into these ears so quietly you barely notice it until your world starts getting smaller. I'm talking about the body's hesitation. Not weakness exactly. Hesitation. That tiny pause before getting up from a chair. That moment at the bottom of the stairs where you suddenly calculate whether the trip is worth it. That grocery bag you carried easily for 30 years, now feeling strangely heavier than it should. Young people think aging happens like a lightning strike, but most of the time it arrives like fog, slow, quiet, almost polite. I remember standing in my garage one afternoon, staring at a ladder I had climbed 1,000 times before, and for the first time in my life, my body asked me a question before moving. Are we sure about this? That shook me. Not because I couldn't climb the ladder, but because the automatic confidence was gone. And here's what I want older folks listening to understand. Many times the body doesn't stop first. The willingness stops first. You avoid one difficult movement, then another, and slowly the body learns smaller living. That's how people shrink without realizing it. They stop reaching high shelves, stop taking walks, stop bending down, stop carrying things. And after enough months pass, the muscles listen. I started fighting this in very small ways. Nothing heroic. Every morning I began walking a little farther down my block than I felt like walking. Some mornings my knees complained the whole time. But the goal wasn't athleticism. The goal was conversation with my body. I wanted my nervous system to remember that movement was still part of life. And I learned something powerful. Older bodies respond better to consistency than intensity. You don't need to punish yourself in a gym at 74 years old. But you do need to keep telling your body, we're still participating in life. Because once the brain decides movement is no longer necessary, the decline speeds up quietly in the background. The fifth challenge is one people rarely admit out loud. It's grief that never fully leads. By the time you reach your 70s, almost everybody is carrying invisible absences. A brother gone, a spouse gone, old friends gone, parents long gone. Even the places you love disappear. Restaurants close, neighborhoods change, houses get sold. Sometimes you drive through a street you once knew by heart and feel like a stranger in your own memories. That kind of grief is difficult because it doesn't arrive dramatically anymore. It becomes woven into ordinary life. You're pouring coffee and suddenly remember somebody who used to sit across from you. You hear a song in a grocery store and your chest tightens for 10 seconds before you continue shopping like nothing happened. Younger people often think grief is something you finish, but older people know better. Grief changes shape. It becomes quieter, but it stays. I still catch myself reaching for the phone to call people who have been gone for years. Isn't that something? The mind remembers love faster than reality sometimes. And I think one reason these years feel emotionally heavy is because older people are grieving constantly while pretending they aren't. We become very skilled at functioning while carrying sadness. But I'll tell you what helped me. I stopped treating grief like an enemy. I stopped asking, why can't I get over this? And started asking, what if remembering is part of loving? That changed everything for me. Missing people